The battlefield fell eerily silent as Victor Hale's voice echoed through the junkyard. The mercenaries paused, their weapons trained on the camp, waiting for a response. Ethan glanced at Lily, who stood frozen, her hands trembling at her sides. Her eyes darted toward the enemy convoy, where a man in a sleek black uniform stepped forward. It was Victor himself, his cold gaze scanning the exiles' defenses. "We don't have much time," Mara muttered under her breath. She turned to Ethan and Lily, her tone urgent. "If we give them what they want, they'll slaughter us anyway. We need another plan." Ethan nodded, though his mind raced with uncertainty. He looked at Lily again, seeing the fear in her eyes. Whatever she was, whoever had created her, it was clear that Victor wanted her back, no matter the cost. But giving up wasn't an option. Not now. "I'll draw their attention," Ethan said suddenly. "Lily, you stay here. Use your abilities to disable as many of them as you can. Mara, keep everyone focused on holding the line." Mara frowned but didn't argue. "Be careful," she warned. "If they catch you." "I know," Ethan interrupted. He turned to Lily, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You can do this. Trust yourself." Before she could protest, Ethan grabbed a length of pipe and sprinted out from behind the barricade. His sudden movement caught the mercenaries off guard. They opened fire, forcing him to zigzag through the debris. Bullets whizzed past him, kicking up clouds of dust, but he kept moving, drawing their focus away from the camp. "Now, Lily," Mara shouted. Lily closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She raised her hands, feeling the strange energy building inside her. It surged outward in waves, knocking down drones and disabling weapons with each pulse. The mercenaries stumbled, disoriented, as their gear malfunctioned around them. Cheers erupted from the exiles, who used the distraction to launch a counterattack. But Victor wasn't easily deterred. He barked orders into his communicator, sending reinforcements to flank the camp. As the battle raged on, Ethan found himself cornered near a pile of scrap metal. A group of mercenaries surrounded him, their guns pointed directly at him. He tightened his grip on the pipe, preparing for the worst. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the junkyard. One of the armored vehicles exploded in a burst of flames, sending shards of metal flying. The mercenaries turned their attention toward the source of the explosion. Caleb, standing atop a nearby ridge with a makeshift launcher in his hands. Behind him, a small group of scavengers charged into the fray, attacking the mercenaries from behind. "For Sector 7, Caleb yelled, raising his weapon. The unexpected reinforcements tipped the scales. With Caleb's help, the exiles pushed back against the mercenaries, forcing them to retreat. Victor cursed under his breath, glaring at the chaos unfolding before him. He pointed a finger at Lily, who stood at the center of it all, her glowing hands still radiating energy. "This isn't over," Victor snarled. "You can run, but we'll find you." With that, he signaled for his men to fall back. The mercenaries climbed into their vehicles and sped away, leaving behind a trail of smoke and destruction. The exiles cheered, their voices echoing through the ruins, but Ethan felt no relief. Victor's parting words lingered in his mind like a dark shadow. As the dust settled, Ethan returned to Lily, who collapsed onto the ground, exhausted. Her hands trembled, and her face was pale. I didn't mean to cause so much damage," she whispered. "You saved us," Ethan replied, kneeling beside her. "That's all that matters." Mara approached, her expression grim despite the victory. "We bought ourselves some time, but they'll be back. And next time, they won't hold back." Caleb joined them, wiping soot from his face. "You two need to disappear. Now, if Victor finds you again, none of us will be able to stop him." Ethan nodded reluctantly. He knew Caleb was right. Staying in the junkyard wasn't safe anymore, not for them, and not for the people who had risked everything to protect them. As they prepared to leave, Lily looked at the faces of the exiles, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me." Mara gave her a rare smile. "Stay alive, kid. That's all the thanks we need." With heavy hearts, Ethan and Lily set off into the unknown, knowing that the fight was far from over, but also knowing they weren't alone. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Ethan Carter wiped the sweat from his forehead as he trudged through the endless maze of junk in Sector 7. The air smelled of rust and oil, a constant reminder of humanity's mistakes. He adjusted the straps on his backpack, which was already half filled with salvaged parts, scraps of metal, wires, and old circuit boards. Scavenging was hard work, but it paid the bills, or at least kept him alive in this desolate wasteland. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the piles of discarded machinery. Ethan paused to take a sip from his canteen, scanning the area for anything valuable. His eyes landed on an old storage container leaning precariously against a pile of scrap metal. It looked like it had been there for decades, its surface corroded and faded. A red hazard symbol was painted on the side, though most of it had peeled away over time. Curiosity tugged at him. Hazard symbols usually meant trouble, but they also sometimes hid treasures, or at least things worth selling. Ethan approached cautiously, boots crunching against the gravel beneath his feet. As he reached out to inspect the lock, a sound stopped him cold. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. A knock. 3 deliberate taps coming from inside the container. Ethan froze, heart pounding. Containers like this were often sealed shut, left untouched for years. Whatever made that noise couldn't possibly be alive, could it? He glanced around, half expecting someone to jump out and laugh at his reaction. But no one was there, just the wind whistling through the ruins and the distant hum of scavenger drones patrolling the area. He hesitated, torn between caution and curiosity. If the container held something dangerous, opening it could mean disaster. On the other hand, if it contained something valuable, ignoring it would be foolish. Taking a deep breath, Ethan grabbed a crowbar from his belt and pried at the edge of the lid. The metal groaned in protest, resisting at first, then giving way with a loud screech. Inside, crumpled amidst scraps of fabric and tangled wires, lay what appeared to be a person. Ethan blinked, unsure if his eyes were playing tricks on him. The figure was small, fragile-looking, and covered in dirt. Her hair clung to her face in matted strands, and her clothes were little more than rags. For a moment, Ethan thought she might be dead, until he saw her chest rise and fall with shallow breaths. "Hey," he whispered, crouching down. "Are you okay?" There was no response. Carefully, Ethan reached out and brushed some of the grime off her face. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and strangely smooth. Something about her didn't seem quite human. But before he could dwell on it, she stirred slightly, letting out a soft moan. Ethan knew he should leave her there. Picking up strangers, especially ones found in biohazard containers, was a recipe for trouble. Yet, looking at her lying helpless and alone, he couldn't bring himself to walk away. Sighing, he slipped his arms under her body and lifted her gently. She was lighter than he expected, almost weightless. As he carried her back toward his shelter, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just stumbled onto something far bigger than himself. The knocks, the container, the girl, they all felt like pieces of a puzzle he didn't yet understand. But one thing was certain. Whatever secrets she carried, they weren't going to stay buried for long. Ethan laid the girl down on a makeshift cot inside his shelter, a small structure cobbled together from scrap metal and salvaged wood. The space wasn't much, but it was safe, or as safe as anything could be in Sector 7. He covered her with a thin blanket, unsure of what else to do. She looked so fragile, like she might break if he touched her too roughly. Her breathing was steady now, though her face remained pale and expressionless. For hours, Ethan sat nearby, keeping watch. He cleaned his tools, sorted through the day's scavenged items, and occasionally glanced at her. Something about her unsettled him. It wasn't just her appearance, though her skin still had that odd shimmer, but the way she seemed both familiar and alien at the same time. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he knew she wasn't like anyone he'd ever met before. Finally, just as the first light of dawn began to creep through the cracks in the walls, her eyes fluttered open. Ethan froze, watching as she slowly took in her surroundings. Her gaze landed on him, wide and unblinking, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice soft and hesitant. It carried a strange quality, almost melodic, as though it resonated in multiple tones. "You're safe," Ethan replied, choosing his words carefully. "I found you in a container out in the junkyard. Do you remember how you got there?" She frowned, closing her eyes as if trying to recall something distant and blurry. "No, I don't remember much. My name is Lily. That's all I know." Ethan nodded, though he felt a pang of unease. A person losing their memory wasn't unheard of, especially in a place like Sector 7, where survival often came at a cost. But there was something about Lily that didn't add up. The way she moved, the faint glow of her skin, it all hinted at something beyond ordinary. "Well, Lily," he said, forcing a smile, "you're welcome to stay here until you figure things out. This isn't exactly a 5-star hotel, but it's better than that container." Lily managed a weak smile in return, though her eyes still held a flicker of uncertainty. "Thank you for helping me." As the days passed, Ethan began to notice peculiar things about her. One morning, while he was tinkering with a broken radio, she reached out and touched it absent-mindedly. To his astonishment, the device sputtered to life, static crackling through the speakers before settling into a clear signal. Ethan stared at her, dumbfounded. "How did you do that?" he asked. Lily looked just as surprised as he did. "I don't know. I didn't mean to." It wasn't the only incident. Another time, when a scavenger drone buzzed too close to the shelter, emitting a high-pitched whine, Lily clapped her hands over her ears. A pulse of energy rippled outward from her body, knocking the drone out of the air. Ethan watched in awe as the machine crashed to the ground, completely inert. "What's happening to me?" Lily whispered, trembling. "Why does this keep happening?" Ethan didn't have an answer. All he knew was that Lily was unlike anyone, or anything, he'd ever encountered. Despite her confusion and fear, she showed remarkable intelligence. She helped him repair broken tools, offering suggestions that seemed far beyond her apparent lack of experience. And yet, she struggled with basic tasks, like cooking or navigating the shelter without bumping into things. Ethan couldn't help but feel protective of her. There was a vulnerability about Lily, a sense that she was lost not just in memory, but in understanding her own existence. He wanted to help her find answers, even if it meant venturing into dangerous territory. But deep down, he also knew that keeping her hidden might be impossible. Sooner or later, someone would come looking for her. And when they did, Ethan would have to decide how far he was willing to go to protect her. Lily's presence in Ethan's life brought changes he hadn't anticipated. At first, it was small things, how she'd hum softly to herself while organizing his tools, or how her laughter seemed to echo faintly, like a sound bouncing off distant walls. But as the days went on, Ethan noticed more peculiarities about her. Once, when they were sorting through a pile of scrap metal, she picked up a broken watch and held it in her hands. Within moments, the tiny gears inside began to turn, and the hands of the clock started moving again. Ethan stared at her, wide-eyed. "How did you do that?" Lily looked down at the watch, her expression a mix of wonder and worry. "I don't know. It just happened." Her uncertainty gnawed at him. Every time something strange occurred, she seemed genuinely surprised, as if she had no control over her own abilities. Ethan wanted to believe her, but the scientist in him, the part that had once studied engineering before the world fell apart, couldn't ignore the facts. Lily wasn't human, not entirely. Yet despite her differences, she felt real to him. Her fear was real. Her gratitude was real. and so was the growing bond between them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the junkyard, Ethan decided to ask her more about her past. They sat together near the entrance of the shelter, sharing a meal of canned beans and stale bread. The air was cool, and the distant hum of scavenger drones provided a constant reminder of the dangers outside. "Do you remember anything else?" Ethan asked gently. "Anything at all?" Lily hesitated, staring at the ground. For a moment, Ethan thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I remember being in a room. A cold, bright room. There were people in white coats, watching me, testing me." She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. "They poked me with needles, hooked me up to machines. I didn't understand what they wanted from me." Ethan's stomach tightened. He reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now. Those people can't hurt you anymore." But Lily shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "What if they find me? What if they come back for me?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. Ethan didn't know what to say. He wanted to reassure her, to promise that he would keep her safe no matter what. But deep down, he knew the truth. Sector 7 was dangerous, and secrets didn't stay buried for long. If someone had gone through the trouble of locking Lily in a container marked biohazard, they wouldn't give up easily. As the night wore on, Lily grew quieter, retreating into herself. Ethan stayed by her side, keeping watch as she eventually drifted off to sleep. He couldn't shake the feeling that their quiet life was about to change. Already, whispers were spreading among the other scavengers about strange sightings. A girl who could fix machines with a touch, who emitted pulses of energy strong enough to disable drones. Some dismissed the stories as nonsense, but others weren't so quick to forget. The next morning, Ethan woke to the sound of footsteps crunching against gravel outside the shelter. Grabbing a wrench for protection, he peered cautiously through a gap in the wall. Two men stood nearby, dressed in patched-up uniforms and carrying makeshift weapons. One of them pointed toward the shelter, his voice low but clear. "We heard rumors about some kind of artifact. Worth a fortune if we find it." Ethan's heart sank. He glanced at Lily, still asleep on the cot. Whatever she was, whoever had created her, she wasn't just a person. She was a target. And now, the hunters were closing in. Ethan's mind raced as he pressed himself against the wall, trying to stay out of sight. The two men outside were still talking, their voices low but urgent. One of them kicked at a pile of scrap metal, sending a clatter echoing through the quiet morning. Ethan clenched the wrench in his hand tighter, his knuckles turning white. He didn't know who these men were or what they wanted, but he was certain of one thing. They weren't just scavengers looking for spare parts. Lily stirred on the cot, her eyes fluttering open. She sat up slowly, confusion written across her face. Ethan held a finger to his lips, signaling for her to stay quiet. Her gaze darted toward the gap in the wall, where the faint outlines of the men were visible. Understanding dawned on her face, and she nodded silently, pulling the blanket closer around herself. The men's footsteps grew louder as they moved closer to the shelter. Ethan glanced around, searching for an escape route. The back of the shelter had a small opening, barely big enough to crawl through, but it was their only chance. He motioned for Lily to follow him, and together they crept toward the rear of the structure. The sound of their own movements seemed deafening in the tense silence. Just as they reached the opening, one of the men called out, "We know someone's in there. Come out now, and we won't hurt you." Ethan froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He turned to Lily, whispering, "Stay low and move fast. Once we're outside, head for the old factory. You remember where it is." Lily nodded, though fear shone in her eyes. Ethan pushed aside the loose sheet of metal covering the opening and gestured for her to go first. She slipped through with surprising agility, her small frame allowing her to navigate the tight space easily. Ethan followed close behind, wincing as the sharp edges of the metal scraped against his arms. Once outside, they crouched low and moved quickly, sticking to the shadows cast by the towering piles of junk. The men's voices grew louder behind them, accompanied by the sound of boots crunching against gravel. They were closing in. Ethan risked a glance over his shoulder and saw one of the men pointing in their direction. There, after them. Adrenaline surged through Ethan's veins as he grabbed Lily's hand and broke into a run. They weaved through the maze of debris, dodging fallen beams and rusted machinery. Behind them, the men shouted and gave chase, their heavy footsteps gaining ground. Suddenly, Lily stopped. Ethan turned to pull her forward, but she stood frozen, staring at something ahead. Following her gaze, he saw a group of scavenger drones hovering in their path, their red sensors glowing ominously. Trapped between pursuers and machines, Ethan felt a wave of despair. But then Lily raised her hands. A soft hum filled the air, growing louder until it became almost unbearable. The drone's lights flickered, and with a burst of energy, they dropped to the ground, lifeless. Ethan stared at her in shock, but there was no time to process what had just happened. Grabbing her hand again, he led her past the disabled drones and into the safety of the old factory. Inside, they collapsed against a crumbling wall, gasping for breath. Ethan looked at Lily, his mind racing with questions. How had she done that? What exactly was she capable of? But before he could ask, Lily spoke, her voice trembling. "I don't know how I did it. It just happens when I'm scared." Ethan nodded, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Whatever you are, Lily, it's clear you're not like the rest of us. And if those men are after you, we need to be ready. This isn't over." Lily's eyes met his, filled with determination despite her fear. "Then we'll fight." Together, Ethan and Lily stayed hidden in the old factory for most of the day, listening to the distant sounds of footsteps and voices outside. The men who had chased them hadn't given up. Occasionally, Ethan would peek through a crack in the wall, watching as they searched the area. They were methodical, combing through every pile of junk with an almost obsessive determination. "They're not leaving," Ethan muttered under his breath. He turned to Lily, who sat on the cold concrete floor, hugging her knees to her chest. Her face was pale, but there was a fire in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She wasn't just scared anymore, she was angry. "Why are they after me?" she asked, her voice shaking. "What do they want?" Ethan hesitated. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew enough to piece together the truth. "You're different, Lily. Those abilities of yours, they're valuable. Whoever made you probably wants you back." Lily's hands tightened around her legs. "Made me? You think I'm some kind of experiment?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what you are exactly. But if those people out there are willing to hunt you down like this, it means you're important. And dangerous, maybe. To them, at least." The words hung heavy in the air. Lily looked away, staring at the cracked floor. After a moment, she whispered, "If they find me, will they take me back to that room? The one I remember?" Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't promise her that it wouldn't happen. Instead, he said, "We'll figure something out. We can't stay here forever, though. Sooner or later, they'll find us." Lily nodded slowly. "Then we need help. Someone who knows how to fight." Ethan frowned. Trusting others in Sector 7 was risky. Most people were only looking out for themselves, but he also knew they couldn't face this alone. Reluctantly, he agreed. "There's someone I know, a guy named Caleb. He used to be an engineer before everything fell apart. Now he fixes things for scavengers and hunters. If anyone can help us, it's him." They waited until nightfall before making their move. The darkness provided cover as they slipped out of the factory and headed toward Caleb's hideout, a ramshackle workshop tucked deep within the junkyard. Along the way, Lily stayed close to Ethan, her senses sharp and alert. Every sound made her flinch, every shadow made her pause. But she didn't complain, didn't slow down. She was determined to survive. When they reached the workshop, Ethan knocked on the metal door 3 times, using a specific rhythm Caleb recognized. A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing a tall man with greasy hair and a scruffy beard. Caleb squinted at them, then raised an eyebrow when he saw Lily. "This is new," he said, stepping aside to let them in. "Who's the girl?" "A friend," Ethan replied quickly. He glanced at Lily, unsure how much to say. "Her name's Lily. She's in trouble, and we need your help." Caleb crossed his arms, studying her carefully. "Trouble? What kind of trouble?" Before Ethan could answer, Lily stepped forward. "People are after me. Bad people. They want to take me somewhere I don't want to go." Caleb's expression darkened. He didn't ask any more questions, which told Ethan he already understood more than he let on. Living in Sector 7 meant picking up on things quickly, especially when it came to danger. "All right," Caleb said finally. "Tell me what you need." Ethan explained their situation, leaving out some details about Lily's abilities. Caleb listened intently, nodding occasionally. When Ethan finished, Caleb leaned back against his workbench, scratching his chin. "You're in over your heads," he said bluntly. "If these people are serious, and it sounds like they are, you won't last long without backup." "What do you suggest?" Ethan asked. Caleb thought for a moment. "There's a group of exiles living on the edge of the junkyard. They don't trust outsiders, but they hate corporations even more. If we can convince them to help, we might stand a chance." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was better than nothing. Ethan looked at Lily, who gave him a small nod. "Let's try," she said softly. As they prepared to leave, Caleb handed Ethan a small device. "Take this. It's a scrambler. Won't stop drones for long, but it'll buy you some time if things get ugly." Ethan thanked him, slipping the device into his pocket. As they stepped back into the night, he felt a flicker of hope. They weren't alone anymore. But he also knew the road ahead would be dangerous. The people chasing Lily weren't amateurs, and neither were the exiles they were about to meet. The journey to the exiles' camp was long and tense. Ethan led the way, with Lily close behind him. Every step felt like walking on thin ice. The junkyard was eerily quiet at night, the usual hum of scavenger drones replaced by an unsettling stillness. Shadows stretched across the ground, twisting and shifting under the pale moonlight. Ethan kept one hand on the scrambler Caleb had given him, ready to use it if danger appeared. Lily stayed silent, her eyes darting nervously from one shadow to the next. She seemed more alert now, as though she could sense something they couldn't. Ethan noticed how her hands occasionally twitched, as if she were holding back some unseen power. He wanted to ask her about it, but decided against it. Now wasn't the time for questions. After hours of careful navigation, they reached the edge of the junkyard where the exiles lived. The camp was hidden among the ruins of old buildings, its entrance marked by a rusted gate covered in warning signs. 2 guards stood watch, their faces obscured by scarves and goggles. They held makeshift weapons, pipes wrapped in barbed wire, and eyed Ethan and Lily with suspicion. "Who are you?" one of them demanded, raising his weapon slightly. "My name's Ethan," he replied calmly, keeping his hands visible. "This is Lily. We need to speak to your leader." The guards exchanged glances. "What do you want?" "We're being hunted," Ethan said, "by people who work for the corporations. We thought maybe you'd understand what that feels like." The second guard snorted. "Everyone here has a sob story. Why should we care about yours?" Before Ethan could respond, Lily stepped forward. Her voice was soft but firm. "Because we're not just running for ourselves. If they catch me, it won't stop there. They'll come after all of you too, anyone who helps us. You know how they operate." The guards hesitated, clearly unsure. Finally, the first one nodded toward the gate. "Wait here." He disappeared inside, leaving the other guard to keep an eye on them. Minutes passed, each one feeling longer than the last. Ethan glanced at Lily, who looked calm despite the tension. He admired her courage. For someone who had lost so much, including her memories, she carried herself with surprising strength. Eventually, the guard returned, motioning for them to follow. They entered the camp, which was larger than Ethan expected. Tents and makeshift shelters were scattered throughout the area, surrounded by piles of salvaged materials. Fires burned in metal barrels, casting flickering light over the faces of the exiles. Some watched Ethan and Lily curiously, while others ignored them entirely. They were led to a small building at the center of the camp. Inside, a woman sat at a table, studying a map spread out before her. She looked up as they entered, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. Her dark hair was tied back, and scars ran along her forearms, marking her as someone who had seen plenty of fights. "I'm Mara," she said simply. "What do you want?" Ethan explained their situation quickly, leaving out only the specifics about Lily's abilities. Mara listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "You're asking for protection," she said. "Why should we risk our necks for you?" "Because we're fighting the same enemy," Lily spoke up. Her voice was steady now, filled with conviction. "If they find me, they'll destroy everything I am. And once they're done with me, they'll come for anyone else who stands in their way. You've seen what they do. Do you really think they'll stop until they own everything?" Mara studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You've got guts, kid. All right, we'll help. But don't mistake this for kindness. If things go south, you're on your own." Relief washed over Ethan, though he knew the fight wasn't over. As they left the building, he turned to Lily. "That was brave." She smiled faintly. "I meant what I said. This isn't just about me anymore." But even as hope sparked within them, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that trouble was closer than ever. The exiles might be allies, but trust was fragile in Sector 7, and enemies rarely gave up without a fight. With the exiles' support, Ethan and Lily began to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. Mara had assigned a small group of fighters to help them, including herself. They worked quickly, fortifying the camp's defenses and gathering whatever weapons they could find. The exiles weren't well equipped. They relied on scavenged tools and improvised gadgets, but they made up for it with determination. Lily stayed close to Ethan, watching as the others worked. She wanted to help but didn't know how. Her abilities were unpredictable, and she feared losing control again. Still, she couldn't sit idly by while everyone else prepared. When no one was looking, she wandered over to a pile of broken equipment and touched a shattered radio. It sparked to life briefly before falling silent again. One of the exiles noticed and raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. That night, Ethan and Lily sat near one of the fires, its warmth doing little to ease the tension in the air. The distant hum of drones grew louder, a constant reminder that their pursuers were closing in. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "We're going to make it through this," he said, more to reassure himself than anything else. "The exiles are tough, and we've got you." Lily looked at him, her expression troubled. "But what if I mess up? What if I hurt someone instead of helping?" "You won't," Ethan replied firmly. "You've done nothing but protect us so far. Trust me, Lily, you're stronger than you think." Before she could respond, Mara approached, her face grim. "They're coming." Scouts spotted them about a mile out. "Looks like they brought reinforcements." Ethan stood, his heart sinking. "How many?" "Too many," Mara admitted. "We'll hold them off as long as we can, but don't expect miracles." As dawn broke, the sound of engines filled the air. A convoy of armored vehicles rolled into view, followed by armed mercenaries clad in black uniforms. They moved with precision, spreading out to surround the camp. The exiles took their positions behind barricades, gripping their makeshift weapons tightly. When the first shots rang out, chaos erupted. Bullets ricocheted off metal, and explosions shook the ground. Ethan pulled Lily behind a stack of crates, shielding her from the onslaught. Around them, the exiles fought fiercely, using every trick they knew to hold their ground. Lily clenched her fists, torn between fear and frustration. She hated feeling useless. Then, as a drone hovered overhead, targeting one of the exiles, something inside her snapped. Without thinking, she stepped out from cover and raised her hands. A pulse of energy surged outward, knocking the drone out of the sky and disabling several enemy weapons. The battlefield went silent for a moment as both sides stared in shock. Ethan grabbed her arm, pulling her back into cover. "What was that?" he hissed. "I don't know," Lily whispered, trembling. "It just happened." Mara appeared beside them, her eyes wide. "Do it again," she ordered. "Now." Lily hesitated, then nodded. Closing her eyes, she focused on the chaos around her. Another pulse rippled outward, this time stronger, disabling more drones and scattering the mercenaries. Cheers erupted from the exiles, who seized the opportunity to push back against their attackers. For a brief moment, it seemed like they might win. But then, a familiar voice crackled over a loudspeaker. "Enough games. Surrender the girl, and we'll leave you alone." Ethan recognized the voice immediately. It belonged to Victor Hale, a ruthless corporate enforcer known for his cold efficiency. He glanced at Lily, whose face had gone pale. She whispered, "They found me." Victor's threat hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. The exiles looked to Mara, waiting for orders, but even she seemed unsure of what to do next. As the mercenaries regrouped, Ethan realized they were running out of options. If they didn't act soon, everything would be lost. Ethan and Lily moved quickly, putting as much distance between themselves and the junkyard as possible. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, but neither of them had time to appreciate the beauty. Every sound made them flinch. Every rustle of leaves or distant hum of engines sent their hearts racing. They knew Victor wouldn't give up easily. He'd be hunting them, and they couldn't afford to let their guard down. They traveled light, carrying only what they could fit in their packs. Ethan led the way, choosing paths that avoided main roads and open areas. He stuck to the shadows, using his knowledge of the terrain to stay hidden. Lily followed closely, her steps quiet but deliberate. She still seemed shaken from the battle, but there was a new determination in her eyes, a resolve to survive, no matter what. By the time night fell, they reached an abandoned subway station. Its entrance was partially collapsed, covered in vines and debris, but it provided shelter from prying eyes. Ethan cleared away some of the rubble and motioned for Lily to follow him inside. The air was damp and smelled of mildew, but it was safe. For now. As they settled into the darkness, Ethan pulled out a small map he'd salvaged from Caleb before leaving. He spread it out on the ground, tracing their route with his finger. "If we keep moving north, we can reach the borderlands," he explained. "It's rough country, but it's far enough from Sector 7 that Victor might not follow." Lily nodded, though her gaze remained distant. "Do you think we'll ever be free of them? Of people like Victor?" Ethan hesitated, unsure how to answer. Finally, he said, "We'll make sure of it, one step at a time." The next morning, they continued their journey, sticking to the tunnels beneath the city. The subway system was a maze of crumbling walls and flooded passages, but it offered cover from drones and patrols. Along the way, Lily began to notice something strange. Whenever they passed certain sections of the tunnel, faint symbols etched into the walls would glow softly in response to her presence. She stopped to examine them, running her fingers over the markings. "What are these?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. Ethan shrugged. "Old tech, maybe, or remnants of whatever used to run this place. Why do they light up when you touch them?" Lily shook her head. "I don't know, but it feels familiar." Her words unsettled Ethan, though he didn't say so. Instead, he urged her to keep moving. They couldn't afford to linger. As days turned into weeks, they encountered fewer signs of civilization. The landscape grew wilder, more untamed. Trees twisted toward the sky, their branches gnarled and skeletal. Rivers cut through the land, their waters murky and cold. It was harsh, unforgiving terrain, but it also offered solitude. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan allowed himself to relax, even if just a little. One evening, as they camped near a stream, Lily sat staring at her reflection in the water. Her shimmering skin caught the moonlight, making her look otherworldly. She sighed, breaking the silence. "Ethan, do you think I'll ever understand who, or what, I am?" He looked at her, his expression softening. "You're Lily. That's all that matters. Everything else, we'll figure it out together." His words brought a small smile to her face. But before she could respond, a sharp crack echoed through the forest. Both of them froze, listening intently. Then came another sound, footsteps, slow and deliberate. "They found us," Ethan whispered, grabbing his pack. He glanced at Lily, his jaw tightening. "Stay close." As shadows emerged from the trees surrounding them, Ethan realized they weren't alone anymore. Victor's men had caught up, their weapons trained on the pair. But standing among them was someone unexpected. A woman in a lab coat, her face pale but composed. "Project Echo," the woman said, her voice calm but commanding. "You've caused quite a lot of trouble. Come quietly, and no one has to get hurt." Lily stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists. "No," she said firmly. "I won't go back." The standoff hung heavy in the air, tension crackling like static electricity. Whatever happened next, Ethan knew one thing for certain. They were out of time. The woman in the lab coat took a step forward, her eyes locked on Lily. Her voice was calm, almost soothing, but there was an edge to it that made Ethan's skin crawl. "You don't understand what you're capable of," she said. "You're not just a person, Lily. You're something greater, something we created." Lily's hands trembled, but she stood her ground. "I'm not yours to control," she replied, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I won't let you take me." Ethan moved closer to her, his body tense. He didn't know what the woman meant by something greater, but he knew one thing. They weren't going down without a fight. He glanced at Lily, silently urging her to stay strong. The mercenaries tightened their circle, weapons raised. The woman gestured for them to hold their fire, clearly confident that resistance was futile. "We don't want to hurt you," she said, "but if you force our hand, we will." Lily closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. When she opened them again, they glowed faintly, like tiny stars trapped within her irises. Energy crackled around her fingertips, and the air grew heavy with static. Ethan stepped back instinctively, watching as Lily raised her hands. "I told you," she said, her voice resonating with power. "I won't go back." A pulse of energy erupted from her body, rippling outward like a shockwave. The mercenaries stumbled, their weapons disabled in an instant. The woman in the lab coat shielded herself with an arm, her composure faltering for the first time. Trees swayed violently, and the ground beneath them shook as though the earth itself was protesting. Ethan covered his ears, the sound deafening. When the waves subsided, the mercenaries were scattered, some unconscious, others retreating into the shadows. Only the woman remained, standing defiantly despite the chaos around her. "You can't run forever," she shouted, her voice tinged with desperation. "This isn't over." Lily didn't respond. She turned to Ethan, her expression softening. "Let's go." They ran through the forest, putting as much distance between themselves and the ambush as possible. By the time they stopped to rest, the sun was rising, casting golden light over the treetops. Exhausted but alive, they collapsed onto the damp grass, catching their breath. "What was that?" Ethan finally asked, breaking the silence. "Back there. You've never done anything like that before." Lily shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know. I just felt something inside me, like I'd finally understood who I am." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, offering what little comfort he could. "Whatever you are, Lily, you're not alone. We'll figure this out together." Days turned into weeks as they journeyed deeper into the wilderness. They found solace in the quiet moments, watching the stars at night, sharing stories of the lives they'd left behind. Slowly, Lily began to embrace her abilities, learning to control them rather than fear them. She fixed broken tools with a touch, healed wounds with a flicker of energy, and even caused flowers to bloom in barren soil. One evening, as they sat by a campfire, Ethan looked at her and smiled. "You know, maybe you're not just something they made," he said. "Maybe you're something more, something better." Lily returned his smile, her glowing eyes reflecting the firelight. "Maybe I am." Though they knew Victor and his people would always be out there, searching, Ethan and Lily had found something far more valuable, a sense of purpose. Together, they vowed to use Lily's gifts to help others, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. And as they walked toward an uncertain future, hand in hand, they carried with them the hope that no matter how dark the world became, light could still shine through, even from within a forgotten container.